Hello and welcome to the Analytics Show, the podcast of business through the lens of data science. But together, we'll dive into learning and sharing where various industries are heading and how data and analytics is at the heart of shaping business growth and productivity. Let's spark different ways of thinking about data and analytics that is relevant to you and prepare your business for future disruption. I'm your host, Jason Tan. I'm delighted you could make it on this journey with us. Hey guys, to continue to get support tips, techniques, and tools and learn from the expert, hit that subscribe button wherever you are so we can keep in touch and continue our lifelong learning together. So, are you using your company data to its full potential? Take our embedded analytic assessment to find out your score. A leading organization like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google have moved beyond dashboard and embedded data science directly into their daily business operation. With our 3-minute test, you will discover your potential in optimizing customer experience and revenue through embedded analytics. You will gain greater clarity, insight, and advice to embed analytics. Plus, you will receive customized results instantly. Find the link to this assessment in the description of this episode. Hello, Brian. Welcome to the Analytics Show podcast. I'm so excited you're dialing in all the way from New Zealand to have you chat with me. And thank you so much for your time. How are you today?
I'm really great, really excited to be here. Thanks for the invite. It's quite an honor to be on your podcast. So yeah, really looking forward to having a chat.
Well, the pressure is mine. I'm really looking forward to learn a few more things about the loyalty program and the use of the analytics from your side of the world. Now, before we get started about those serious things, I know you spent 12 years in a number of places in Europe, like London, Amsterdam, one of my favorite countries. What is your most vivid memory about this time in both your personal and professional life?
Probably my most vivid memory was probably in Spain where we started. So personally, was the first time realizing that I was in another country and I was surrounded by people that no one spoke the language, that I was having to operate in a different language. And this will sound really silly, but it was a really big revelation at that moment that other languages aren't just English with different words. You know, they're really different ways of thinking about the world around you and seeing it. It was, obviously coming from New Zealand, we're quite insulated and sheltered in many ways. And that was quite a big revelation. So personally, that was massive. And I guess professionally, probably a couple of big revelations. One was that New Zealanders are surprisingly well equipped to do well. And I think this would apply to Australians as well in the bigger world markets. As long as we recognize that we're mostly generalists, so we don't tend to have the deep specialization of the North Americans or the Europeans, but we tend to be very adaptive and able to turn our hands. So if you recognize the strengths and weaknesses of that, it can be a massive advantage. And then also my other big revelation was that the really big, amazing organizations in the world, the huge names, they don't necessarily have all the answers either. They're learning as they go as well.
That's a really unique insight about what you just say about the professional, and that seems to translate into your current role. But again, I'm gonna resist on going into that for now. I'll go that later. Where about were you in Spain as the first destination? I remember Barcelona quite well. I think it's a really, really beautiful country, especially the church by this famous architect, which the name escaped me.
Sagrada Familia.
Yeah.
Gaudi. Finished by a New Zealand architect now. They're still finishing it, and it's a New Zealander that's running the architecture now.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, it takes them 200 years, I think, to some extent. Yeah. Perhaps that translates or that applies to the world that we are in, that beautiful software doesn't have to be get done in 1 year. It can it can take some time. So as long as it serves its purpose first.
100%. I think it's a really good insight, actually, that real change and real value typically is never delivered in a quarter. You might deliver a first step or a few steps, but real transformation and really valuable developments in software and solutions or insights, they grow over time, a little step at a time. You climb Everest, many, many, many little steps. And I think it's a very good analogy and a great truth that anyone promising that you're climbing the Everest of software in one sprint, yeah, they're probably lying.
Take a step back and think about it first. Now, one of the interesting that I'm going to ask you is, any suggestion for fellow Kiwi to follow your path in venturing to Europe instead of Australia? And probably Brisbane as well. I know over my career, I have met so many Kiwi because I think Brisbane is probably the closest to New Zealand as opposed to Sydney or Melbourne.
Yeah. So my advice to Kiwis heading over to Europe, particularly, the first one would be don't limit yourself to London. Europe's much bigger than just the UK, and the opportunities in cities like Amsterdam and Berlin and Madrid are fabulous. And, I think it'll really open people's eyes. And the other is to back themselves. I think a lot of Kiwis would be surprised at just how well able they will be to compete and perform at a very high level in those big organizations. So don't be too shy. Don't think you can't do it. Back yourself, give it a go, and you'll probably be surprised at how successful you'd be.
One of my team member, who's a data scientist, she did a degree of maths in Netherlands, and then subsequently she did a master degree in Germany, in maths again. Do you think, and surprising to me, as much as I know of it, she did both courses in English and as well. Do you think language was probably the very first reason that people often don't think that outside of London or Scotland is the reason that language barrier is stopping them to go there?
I think there's a couple of reasons. Language is potentially part of it, although it shouldn't be. And I'm sure as anyone that has had to learn another language to operate, it's an incredibly valuable experience. So I'd recommend that on its own. The other is, I think, just habit. Australia and New Zealand are still fairly tightly connected with the United Kingdom because of our history.
Yeah.
And so it's just got a natural gravity. You go there, there's other people you know there, there's the pubs, there's your brothers or your sisters or your cousins or your friends or whatever. And then you go there and you follow into a well-worn path that people have been following for 100 years just about now. So I think there's a lot of habit in there as well. And there's also a bit of a fear coming from, I think this is common in many of the English-speaking countries, particularly the Anglo-Saxon ones. Learning a second language is not natural generally for most people for English is their first language. We can be lazy and we don't have to learn other ones. So the idea of going somewhere where you need to do that can be quite daunting, particularly as an adult, where for many Europeans, of course, by the time they're an adult, they'll have 2, 3, 4 languages under their belt. And the same for people in parts of Asia and Africa. Being able to speak 4 languages to a reasonable level, it's not that special. The people working as supermarket checkout operators in those parts of the world, they could quite easily have 4 languages under their belt.
Fascinating. Now, share with us about your current role of the Chief Data Analytic and Technology Officer at the Loyalty New Zealand and perhaps the company itself. I think what you were describing earlier with that generalist seems to apply in your current role. That's the first thing. The second thing is I myself probably appreciate, well, it seems a lot more complicated, but I myself appreciate the responsibility you could have for the tech and the data, because I think it probably will make the life so much easier in building up the whole thing.
Yeah, 100%. So I started here at Loyalty New Zealand 3.5 years ago, and then as the CDAO, so looking after data and analytics. And then I took over the tech part of the portfolio a year after that. So I've been doing that 2.5 years. I run the two quite separately, so I think they're different disciplines. But yes, in practice, taking on that extra area has actually probably reduced my workload by reducing the friction. So I work for Loyalty New Zealand, but most people would know us better as Flybys. So for the Australians, we're very similar, but not part of the Australian Flybys organisation. Similar sort of concept, large coalition loyalty program. What really drew me to it, it's been running a long time, Loyalty, 25 years here. So we've got 25 years worth of data on 80% of New Zealand households, huge breadth, huge depth. Wasn't absolutely making the most of it when I first arrived. So that presented a really exciting opportunity for a data geek like myself. That was a pretty cool thing. And I really was drawn to some of the things about the culture here. It was very innovative. They wanted to invest and really develop what was happening, which we've been doing. But at the same time, and it's something that I'm quite passionate about, has a very strong ethical base about using the data. There's never been any thought that we're just going to sell this incredibly valuable data asset to whoever, any Tom, Dick or Harry out there. It's kept very tightly controlled and managed. So those were all things that were pretty exciting for me. Had a very challenging program that was wanting to be achieved from a business point of view. And the only way that was going to happen was by a massive modernization of the tech and data value chain, not just the foundation, but the whole thing from top to bottom, people, process, technology. So I was like, yay. It's big enough that we got a good budget and we're doing lots of fun things, but it's small enough that you can actually make decisions very quickly and move really fast. So yeah, it was pretty much a perfect opportunity for me when my family and I were looking to come back to New Zealand. So very, very cool.
And I think in particular where you have the responsibility from the tech and the data as a separate team, I think that allows you to move even quicker, and you get to share what the perspective from each of the team to the other side of the world. Before that happened, what was that? What was it bringing to this moment of combining this? Because I think this is really, really unique. And as far as I'm aware, I haven't really seen, you're the first person that I am talking to who share the both sides of the world in the same role. What is the advice that, perhaps maybe I'll take a step back, what was the advice that you would share to say this is workable and this is really important to be able to make use of the data in this modern world, especially with all this enterprise software?
Yeah, it's an interesting and tricky one that I've reflected on. So what drove us initially, if I'm being honest from my CEO's point of view, was we were looking at efficiencies and costs, and was this something I could pick up in my portfolio? From my point of view, I was looking at it from, hey, this could really reduce friction, break down silos and all those sort of things. Although I was a bit nervous about it because my background's obviously data and analytics. I'm not a hardcore infrastructure, security, tech type person. Now, and this will be very controversial, I am not sure if it will work as effectively where you include data and analytics within the normal remit of a CIO or CTO. And that's not a reflection on the quality or caliber of any of the people in those roles, but I think by default, there will be a strong focus on what I'd consider a lot of the more defensive aspects of the technology stack, security, governance, infra, cost, all those reliability, SLAs up to all those really important key things. And then data and analytics fits in within that. I think to get the culture change you need to get the maximum value out of your data, you've got to come at it from a different direction. Yeah. So I think it works best if you expand the remit of the data and analytics person. Obviously, I'm very biased in this opinion because that's where I've come from. But the trouble with that is you're going to need to have a data and analytics person that has a reasonable depth on the technology side. And I don't pretend I'm good enough. I have an IT manager, our head of tech ops, who is exceptional. He covers a lot of my blind spots for me, but I have enough knowledge of what's important and why some of these. I do have a somewhat technical background many years ago. But I think that's critical. If you would purely come in through data and analytics, particularly from a pure sort of business side, I don't think you could bridge those two, because there's a risk that you wouldn't pay enough attention to those critical defensive parts, the security, the infra, the SLAs, the uptime, the cost management. So I think it's challenging to get that balance right, but if you can, then the way it unlocks the data value chain is, I can say it's worked fantastically well. It's really helped us a lot.
I like how you were saying that to get even more value out from the data and analytics, it's so important to come in from a different angle and then also working with other teams. And that brings me to the collaboration between other teams in the organization, especially the marketing team. And I think it is a spot on topic for what you guys do. My question for you is, how do you build a partnership with other teams, like the marketing team, to create a more cohesive strategy for the organization rather than acting in solo?
Yeah, I think this is a really, really important key question. And I was reflecting on this with someone else a little while ago, talking through it. And I think one of the key areas that we as technologists make mistakes, and I've done it myself many times, is we will often come up with the great ideas of what we need to do and then sell them to the rest of the business. We talk about selling them and buy-in and storytelling and influencing. I think we've got to throw out that thinking altogether. I think what we need to do is consciously forget about what we think needs to happen. Go and start with the CEO's strategy, or the business strategy. Start at the top and say, right, if that's what we want to achieve, what do I need to do to enable it? What must be true? So we may or may not need to go to the cloud. Don't think, oh, we've got to go to the cloud. How do I justify it? Think about, hey, if we want this degree of responsiveness and speed and handling the volume of data that you're saying to be a data-driven organization, shit, what do I need from technology? Gee, my old Oracle on-prem stack probably isn't going to cut it. Okay, but I'm not doing it because we need to move to the cloud. I'm doing it because you said you want to get down to a segment of one and be hyper-personalized. Cool, I can do that, but I'm going to have to run models in, near real time on terabytes of data. Tick, I can do that. But here's now what the technology enablers are. That means I'm not trying to sell to the CEO or the CMO tech debt reduction or data integrity, any of that. I'm saying, this is what I need to do for you to be able to do this, and explain it in a way they can understand. This is as fast as our old Oracle stack can go. This is what I can do in this new technology called cloud. I'll kind of show you why. But it's irrelevant, the technology. It's an enabler for what we've identified as the business value. One of the things that falls out of that is I prefer not to use language like a data strategy or a tech strategy. We've got one strategy. There's the strategy, and we feed into that. So we've got enablers in that. What it means is there should be a direct linkage between anything we're doing and something in that business strategy. If that business strategy changes, we should see the changes ripple through our tech strategy. Maybe we don't need to go to the cloud anymore. Okay, I'd be surprised, but that because we're doing it for those reasons. An example here, so our CMO is the sponsor of our tech debt work stream, because everything in that work stream is directly unlocking a capability she needs to deliver her strategy further down the line. It's absolutely. So when we were looking at rejigging things, it was really interesting. It wasn't me fighting to keep the priority on some of the things in the tech debt stream was our CMO, because it's not tech debt to her, it's something that's stopping me achieving my business outcomes. So I think that's a really important shift, because then everything else falls into place. I'm not a sparring partner or someone to overcome or a cost to be reduced. I'm the one that delivers the building blocks that lets them get their business outcomes. And that naturally leads to a partnership, which naturally leads to cooperation, and you never have some of these stupid buy-in or selling conversations, because I think if you are, you're probably already behind the 8 ball and in trouble.
Yeah, I think that reminded me event that I attended many years ago. There was this Brisbane boy, Aussie guy, who went on to work for Facebook, and then he was clearly coming back and sharing the story. And then one of the things that he was sharing is similar to what you were saying. Is like, he was saying that Mark Zuckerberg, or as they call it, Jack, was sharing the vision that he wanted to achieve for that particular year. And one of them is about the cost reduction. And he basically then get everyone to think about, for their role and their team, what can they do to achieve that cost reduction. And then for them, it sort of like pushed that whole thinking to them, because and they came out to something, whatever that is, I cannot remember the detail, that helped them to result saving 4 million a year, and then at the same time significant improve about whatever that the operation that we're running. Obviously, Jack is not going to know this sort of detail, but I think that is a classic example of like how sharing the vision and get the team to think about achieving those things, and naturally that would also lead to that whole collaboration. I think that is a story that is sort of like really going to my head, that I could remember this. That's why I thought like it's worthwhile highlighting what you guys are doing is so similar to what Facebook was doing for years with Jack.
Yep, cool. I think it's a key one, because the organizations that get that wrong, I think that you've built you're building on sand, and everything after that, you're going to have trouble.
When you were giving the example earlier, I think you talk a little bit about the hyper personalization, and I know from the research that I have done in preparing for this interview, you spoke about the concept of doing marketing in a one-on-one with customer. Tell us more about this.
So that's an aspiration and a goal. I mean, historically, marketers have always wanted to have a one-on-one conversation with their customers or members. For us, that's nothing new. That's what every marketer wants. It just hasn't been practical to do it at scale. Yeah. If you think about it, your corner butchery or your corner grocery store, that's what they used to do. You would come in, I know who you are, I know you like a particular thing, I put a packet aside for you, I give a little something to your children because I know you're a favorite customer. It's natural. Trying to do that at scale when you're a national or global supermarket chain or something, that gets really challenging, and that needs technology to unlock. So the aspiration has always been there. And to overcome that, historically, what we've done is things like segments. Okay, we can't talk to everyone individually, so we'll kind of group a bunch of people that look a bit like Jason and sound a bit like Jason and probably feel a bit like Jason, and we'll treat you the same. And of course, that's a blunt instrument, because we're all a bit different. We share some things alike, some not. We have different personas. So the marketing aspiration has stayed the same. If we're smart, then we now have the technology that can get us more and more towards that. I don't think we're going to be right there, not practically and not yet, but we're edging closer and closer, and we can get much better. Where instead of the characteristics, we might have defined you by 3 or 4 key things, now it might be 300 or 400 things. Yeah. So the people we're putting with you become a very small group and really have a lot of those important things in common about the thing we want to talk to you about. And that's, again, why we're not doing it. Real time's not important in and of itself. It's important if it helps get that message out the right way at the right time, in a way that's relevant and valuable for you, the customer or member. Yeah, in and of itself, it's just a thing. So hyper-personalization is all about that. If we have that tight, again, got to have that tight partnership, but if we have that tight partnership, so my teams are understanding what the marketing teams are really trying to do, we can unlock the potential of some of this new technology to say, well, actually, we used to be able to do that. Yeah, now we could probably do this. We could do it that much more. Would that be useful? Often the answer will be, well, I'm not sure. Right, let's do some test and learns. Again, with digital technology, that's much easier and cheaper. We can do a few A/B tests, throw out a few things, see what works, reinforce it, and it allows us to shrink that idea of segment right down to become much more personalized, and therefore the conversations are way more relevant. And that's good for everyone, because no one likes spam. No one wants rubbish in their inbox. You want things that you open and go, whoa, that's a really cool deal, and it's just what I was looking for. Cool, I'll go and take advantage of that. That saves me some money. So that's what we want to be achieving.
Now, on this topic, what do you think are the ingredients to get it right before starting to scale?
So there's a couple of things, or there's a number of them, but there's on the what I'd say the marketing or the business side, I think one of the key bits is you need to know and understand who your member is, who they are, what they value, how they value it, all those things. You got to know who they are. Don't guess, don't make it up, don't assume. We can't assume that because I like this, that the other 5 million New Zealanders feel the same way. That's not valid. And the second thing is, if I was able to arrange for you as the marketing leader to talk to one of our members one-to-one, if you don't know what to say to them, then we shouldn't try scaling the message. If you understand our value proposition and you're saying, geez, if I could get a one-on-one conversation with our member or customer, I could explain what's available, they would love it, then I can help scale that. So you need to know and understand and listen to who they are and what they want, and then need to know and understand what your message is. That's on the business side. And then on the technical side, I'd say you've got to do all the boring, unsexy stuff. There's groovy data science and data modeling and really cool, shiny things that are awesome. But data quality, data governance, data ownership, data lineage, they're what determines whether you're building shelfware and 1,000 POCs that never go anywhere, or whether this is going to go into production and get used. And I've seen it just so often, the organizations that don't get that right, particularly on data quality, and you end up with data scientists spending 95% of their time in Excel trying to stitch horrid data together and fix it enough that they can do their job. I think we've all seen that.
I certainly have, and I have heard quite a bit of story. I am curious to know, if you don't mind sharing, what are the challenges that you have faced in this area in terms of like building up this whole thing?
So I think a couple of them spring to mind. One is that in most organizations, and ours was no different, these silos have been in place a long time, and these bad habits of operating in isolation, and there's not always good trust between the silos. People have been burnt before. So when I came in here, the tech and data teams had a history of over-promising and under-delivering. I think that was common. So the rest of the organization didn't know whether things were going to get delivered when they said they were or not. And the rest of the organization, there was a tendency to never cut any slack into the tech or data teams. If you set a date, then you had to hit it no matter what, even if we change all the scope. So there wasn't the trust base there. So that was one that had to be overcome. You've got to build that trust, build the relationships. It's no different to any other relationship. It's humans getting to know each other and building awareness. And one of the key parts of that I've noticed is that most of organizational units and silos don't share a common language. And without a common language, you can't build trust. So you've got to interoperate, work together, talk to each other, and start understanding what each other mean when they say things. Because tech and data, we've got a massive jargon, whether you're talking a marketing team or finance or supply chain, they have a whole lot of jargon that they use. You need to understand each other's priorities. So by building that common language, you can build the trust, and then you can start building those partnerships. So that was one of the challenges we walked into here. That wasn't established. So that takes some time at the beginning to consciously break those down and build up a partnership.
Hey all, I just want to give a quick shout out about this episode. It's sponsored by the Embedded Analytic Program at DDA. And the Embedded Analytic Program is designed for senior manager and executive in the business team who want to integrate data science into daily business operation and use it to drive customer experience excellence and revenue. And book unlimited strategy session for a full year and start embedding analytics into the business frontline. For more information about this program, please refer to the description of this episode. Now, let's get on back to the interview.
I'm gonna get sidetracked a little bit, but also dwell a little bit deeper. I think you spoke a lot about trust. And as an engineer, I think if you were telling me that 10 years ago, I was like, Brian, what are you talking about? What I care is about getting the data right, building this beautiful model and get all these things. And then we're gonna solve the world's hunger problem. Why should I spend the energy of talking to another human being when my job is so much important in getting this right?
Yeah.
And I think that is so common in the engineer, and so common for the people like myself. What is your advice for the people like me 10 years ago to understand?
And myself, I've been there as an SAP consultant that maybe didn't have quite all the priorities right once upon a time. And I've particularly seen it engineers and architects. I see it especially in architects. The advice I would be given is have a look at the people that are successful, particularly the senior technology leaders and architects, and the ones that aren't. And I find it falls into two groups. You'll get one group that are a very frustrated, cynical bunch who keep going on about they don't understand, they're stupid, they won't listen to us, and they can't seem to get any progress. Then there's another smaller group who often get labeled as lucky. You are lucky you got your project, or you're lucky to get the budget. There's no luck. Those lucky people understood that it's all about humans and the way humans interoperate. And ultimately, everything comes down to humans making decisions. So if you want your code to go into production, if you want the budget to fix this tech debt and get it happening, that's because a human in another part of the organization understood what you were telling them and made a decision that suited you. And so that doesn't happen based on all the technical knowledge in the world. That means you've had to be able to communicate with them in a way they understood, and they had to trust what you were saying. So I always tie it back to, if you want to be getting the best results for yourself and for your organization, technically, you've got to help the people that control the purse strings understand what's important to it for them in a way that they value, and then they can help you. Otherwise, and most of us know them, particularly you see a lot with architects, but also senior engineers, you'll become one of those old, bitter, cynical ones that's complaining that everyone else is stupid and don't understand and never seem to be able to get any fun or cool projects to work on. I think it's a critical part of our industry for tech and data, and I think it's one we need to spend more time further down in people's careers supporting them and helping them understand the importance of other humans in their career and in what they're trying to develop and get going live.
I'm gonna throw you in the spot again. I think everything was spot on. The next question I have for you though is, I know personally is not a natural path to be able to shift that from one role or one sort of mindset to another mindset. It was quite a paradigm shift, and it took me quite some time to be able to figure out that. And my question for you is, what are the things that they can do to learn those skill set, and so they can shift themselves into the other side of the paradigm and do what you do and what you were saying?
I think one of the things that can really help, and this goes right across all of STEM, science, technology, engineering. I come from an engineering background.
Yes.
We tend to be very logical creatures and like to think that we're fact-driven, and we struggle often with people we perceive that aren't. So I think there's a lot of value in learning, because it's typically what we like to do, is to learn and understand the neuroscience of humans. If you understand the science of how our brains work, this isn't such a weird, soft skill, airy-fairy thing. You start realizing this is part of STEM. Humans are wired to think a particular way to stimulus. It's another piece of science and engineering that we can understand. Once you start understanding it like that, you realize there's inputs, there's processing, and there's outputs. And you can learn how to best make use of that computer, which is inside ours and everyone else's head. We also will tend to learn along the way. We're not nearly as logical as we think we are. But then this stops being a soft skill or something that you're born with or you're not born with. This is science that you can learn, and you can learn how to best operate within that science. And you understand then, humans think and react a particular way because that's how we're built. Okay, so if I want to interact with a human computer, this is how I do it best to get the result I want. So it brings it back to, I think, a level that isn't scary anymore, or isn't feeling like, I don't do that, I can't do that stuff, I work with computers. And then it becomes quite a natural progression to say, not only can I learn this, but I understand it, actually I understand why I have to learn this. This is a really critical part. Otherwise, all these cool things I'm doing are never going to come to life and be seen and be used, because I haven't understood how to communicate with a key part of the equation, i.e. the end user, the decision maker. So I think it can come back to science. And pitching a book, there's one I love on this that I'd recommend to anyone to read, which is the Daniel Kahneman and the Thinking Fast and Slow. He's a Nobel-winning scientist, been around a long time, since the 60s. It's not like a new buzzy idea, it's hardcore science. And it explains about how humans make decisions, and therefore, if you want to influence other humans, and yourself for that matter, how to do it. That's a great one, I think, for young engineers, architects, STEM folks in general, to help get a better understanding of how to interact with other humans.
I love how you use the terminology of human computer and neuroscience. I'm going to steal them next time so that I can help them to understand. Well, this is actually another type of the science that you will enjoy. It's just different kind. It's slightly a bit more gray, but it's still science. Now that we have got the technology, the people, the data analytics, the personalization, and also even the market positioning, my question for you though is, do you think people sometimes, especially I find in the enterprise, is that they may overlook one of the most critical component, which is copywriting with persuasive? I think it's to some extent it related to what you just shared with me, that whole human computer, that was more of dealing one-on-one, but this is more at a scale.
Yeah, I have certainly seen it in some organizations, and I think it all comes back to that first thing we talked about partnership and with the marketing teams, because obviously your marketing teams will never forget that. That's their world. They're awesome at it. They're amazing. Where the risk comes when you start thinking that this is a technology project because you're implementing technology with technologists. It's not a technology project. If we're doing marketing automation, it's a marketing project. The business outcome is you're trying to share information with your member or customer that's relevant to them so that they take up the offer or make the saving or feel rewarded, whatever it is. That happens when you get the relevant message in front of them. Technology is just an enabler. If the right technology was a whiteboard with a pen, then that's all you need. And write it on the wall of the store, that's fine. So that the heart and soul of it is still that marketing message. It's got to be short, it's got to be crisp, it's got to be relevant, it's got to be easily understood. And that's tough. And it's got tougher now because, of course, everyone's getting all these things in their inboxes. You got to grab people's attention with a relevant message really quickly. And when I start scanning, I'm already going, oh, wow, that's really interesting for me. You've targeted me right. I was just thinking about buying one of them. Sure, that's interesting. Oh, and I've understood what you're saying. If, for instance, the worst case, you were leaving your copywriting to a technologist like myself, you might have done everything right. I've got a segment of one. I've got the perfect message for Jason, and you never opened the email because even the headline of it was, you've missed. Or even if you did open it, you haven't understood what I'm trying to say. You didn't get the message. So ultimately, all that technology still comes down to delivering that message. That's badly written, difficult to understand, not relevant. Whole rest of it is a waste. So absolutely, and I think it's something that can't be lost in the technology.
Yeah.
And I think an organization is safe and that it never will be if you've built that genuine partnership at the beginning. Because in my case, no matter how excited I get about our new shiny technologies and the cool things we're doing, I've got an amazing CMO partner who's got both hands on my feet, dragging me back to earth, going, hang on, remember what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep. And we stay on target and we stay on track. So that partnership's key.
I love it. Now, apart from hyper personalization, I think that's a big topic in the current world everywhere. Any other area that you would like to see more collaboration between the analytic and the marketing team to improve this whole idea of customer engagement?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think it goes right across the data value chain from, simple questions like, who are our customers? That understanding part, I think there's some, huge value by working really closely together so that we get a really good balance between that quant and qual. What do we feel? What are we hearing? What are the words? What's the data telling us? Now, when we bring those together in an environment of high levels of understanding and high levels of trust, then you get really cool conversations. You don't get the, well, I believe they prefer yellow. The data says something different. The data must be wrong. Or the data says blue, it must be blue. You get the really good conversation like, wow, that's really interesting. What we're hearing and what we're seeing are different. Let's explore that. Let's unwrap that. Could you look further into this? Oh, yeah, let's go and ask them that. You get the right conversation. So right from the beginning of understanding, I think there's huge value. And at the other end, of course, there's massive value as well, which is what worked in the ROI and things like that. And again, you need a high trust environment for that, because otherwise the analytics team can look very scary because they're the noose for hanging the marketing team. Well, that didn't work, or that was rubbish, as opposed to we've got a really agile and fast A/B testing approach. We tried this, that didn't work, tried this, it did work. Let's go further on it. And we're seen as tight partners to success rather than someone scary that might derail what they're trying to achieve or make it look like that they're performing well. So I think right across the board, there's the opportunity for tighter partnership.
Now, let's take a step back about this marketing focus and shift the focus to the enabler, which is the data and analytic teams. My first question for you is, how do you get the data foundation right? Especially we are talking about the marketing, so which leads me to think about the customer data platform, so the marketing team can use all of this data to be able to achieve what they set out to achieve.
Yeah. So again, great question. I think it's where a lot of organizations go wrong. I've seen a number that have implemented either Marcom solutions or CRM or CDPs over the top of a weak foundation, and then of course very expensive and very disappointing results. I sound like a stuck record, but the first thing comes back to that tight partnership. You've got to understand what the business teams are wanting out of this. What's our purpose? That's the same whether this was marketing or supply chain or finance. Why are we doing it? Again, if I'm selling them a platform and trying to convince them they need it, we're doomed. If I've heard the business outcome and we're working backwards to say, well, this is the technology we need, like, you know, what you're telling me, Jason, you're going to need a platform with all the data all brought together in a good way. It's what we call a CDP. Don't worry about the name, but you're going to need one of them. And some of the key things I'll be telling you if you needed that was, so we got to make sure that data quality is right.
Yeah.
And to get the data quality right, I'm going to need owners from your teams to tell me when it's right or wrong, because my teams don't know, and what we should do about it when it is. So again, it all comes back to those boring, unsexy foundational things, so that when you try to automate and scale, you can do it safely, because actually the data's there and it's broadly correct enough. Again, how accurate does it need to be? Well, that depends what you're doing. Are we talking a rough A/B testing exercise, or are we talking about in a medical thing, cancer testing? Okay, those have got very different, you know, risk balancing. So you need to understand what's good enough. Perfect might not be. For our A/B testing, we can get the data about 60% right within a day. Perfect. That's all we need. Okay, great. We can do that. So that, I think that's critical. Understand really clearly what the business outcomes are, work backwards from there, and then get all of those basic boring things right so that your foundation is solid. Then it lets you go really fast too. So your CDP seems to be very quick and easy because the data goes in and you can use it. Not the data goes in and then you realize you've got 18 months worth of master data and data cleaning to do before you're actually going to do your first automation.
What is the most common reason that you see other organizations are failing in this crucial step, you think?
I think probably the single biggest one I've seen is the seductive nature of some of the vendors and some of the big consultancies that will show, you know, we can come in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, build this amazing POC, the senior leadership see it, and I just want that. I just want that shiny thing on top. And I'm not interested in what you're telling me that this 5 years of underinvestment in tech and data that I've had mean that that's not sustainable, because this vendor or this consultancy was able to get it working in 3 weeks. Why can't you? And of course, it's stitched together in Excel, it's one-off, it's all of those things. So I think there's a lot of desire for a quick fix without a willingness to actually do the required work to get it right. So I think that's the single biggest problem. And I think it's something that senior leadership need to take a lot of responsibility for. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. You know, be very cautious of the silver tongues that are selling you magic bullets that are going to solve all of your problems. Be a bit more savvy. And I'd say there's a responsibility on the tech and data teams. Learn about humans, learn about how to talk to them, learn how to influence your senior leadership in a way they understand, so they don't just think of this as they're reducing costs by not spending money on tech and data. They realize the strategic limitations of the choices they're making.
Love it. Now, one of the things that I think is going to impact this CDP, impacting this digital marketing and the data analytics is on the look ahead a few years. And that brings me to the question I have for you about Google, who plans to phase out the cookies on the internet browser. How is this going to impact the digital marketing world? and even to the data analytic world, it seems like it's going to create more opportunity in certain area, but more challenges in different areas.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, because depending on where people sit at the moment and how much they use and rely on those cookies, I hear people going, oh my God, it's the end of the world as we know it. The whole world's changing. It's not going to make any difference at all. It'll be fine. We'll hardly even notice. So it's fascinating. But for me, I think one of the key things that the message should be to own companies is look after their own backyard first, in the sense of what first party data and second party data do you have available to you? And are you using everything you've got? Particularly, I mean, there's obviously first party opportunities. A lot of organizations just aren't getting the basics right. Get the basics right. It's there. But even second party, there's some really interesting partnerships that can happen, particularly along supply chains and things like that, where there's a lot of opportunity if people would be a bit more realistic and a bit more open. I think we can do a lot without it. I mean, we're lucky because we've got this colossal data set, so we don't care. We're incredibly well set up already. In fact, it's good for us. And in general, I think it's actually a good thing, because I'm quite strong on the ethical side. So I'm a strong believer in fair value exchange and a strong believer in transparency of what we're doing with people's data. So I think if we're coming back to first party, zero party, first party data, that can really allow that ethical relationship and trust to build up. So there's not a lot of trust in our industry at the moment around how organizations are using data, when you look at companies like Facebook and that. So I think it's a great opportunity to start building trust, and that most organizations look to, if you can, your first party data, particularly if you're B2C, use what you've got, clean it, groom it, use it well. And if you're more in a B2B, so a wholesaler type environment, look to get the consolidated supply chain and do a fair value share between your different partners, so you're building up that picture that you need. It's all going to be there for you. And then, of course, use what you've got. I mean, the amount of organizations that aren't effectively using the data they've already got is pretty large. So I think it's navigable, but it will, of course, depend on what your access is to first and second party. If people that have built up an entire business model on third-party data, especially if it's coming off those cookies, then there may be some stormy weather ahead for them.
Yeah, I think B2B is so hard. It's a whole different ballgame, and I think it's a completely different story for a different day. But I want to pick up something that you mentioned about second-party data. I understand that what is first-party data and what is third-party, but it's the first time I heard of second-party for the benefit of myself and other people who probably came across this thing. What exactly is second-party data?
So that's where you're using the data from one of your partners. So you're involved in it, but it's not. So third parties, like I'm just buying it off somewhere, don't even know. But imagine I'm a wholesaler like Heineken, and I'm selling through a liquor store. I don't know who's buying my goods. I know that I sold you 200 pallets of beer. I don't know anything about who bought them. But my immediate partner, my customer, does. And so if I'm sharing data with them up the supply chain, then I'm using second-party data through there. So it's not completely remote,
right?
But your immediate data.
That makes sense now, and I think to some extent, I feel like this is probably one of the areas that is underutilized in many parts of the organization, second party of the data. Would that be the right way to describe it?
What was that? Sorry? The
second party data is underutilized in many organizations.
Very, very, very much. Absolutely. I think it's a huge opportunity there, particularly, I mean, the obvious one is supply chains, but there's far more opportunity there.
Mm.
Yes, I think there's a massive opportunity there. And I think it's a much safer opportunity to do things ethically in a way where you get really good value exchange for both parties in the data exchange and the end consumer of the product.
Mm.
I think it's huge. I've seen a challenge with it is that everyone seems to think their data is more valuable than everyone else's data. So there tends to be that everyone thinks I've got the most valuable data, so you should pay me for it, but I should get yours for free. So, and I think people need to get over themselves and move beyond that. But yeah, I agree with you. I think there's huge opportunity there.
That's true. Now, coming back to that phasing out cookie, how should company prepare for this transition?
Oh, that's a really interesting one. Obviously, that's going to depend a lot on how much you're using it at the moment. Now, I'll have to be honest, it's not something I'm super knowledgeable on because we don't have this problem. We've got this massive first party, because we're a coalition network, we are that grouping of second party data we just talked about. We've got masses of first party, huge amount of second party, so we can do really cool things. So what I think as an organization, I mean, if you're not already heavily dependent on it, okay, then you don't need to worry. That's a problem. If you are, I think what you've got to look at is what are you using that third-party data for? Why do you need it? Well, presumably it will be ad targeting, probably online, but you know, whatever it is you're using it for. How can you do that better with your first-party or second-party data? Often it'll come on the first party is a lot of organizations don't have good first-party data because they're not collecting it or because their customer doesn't want to share it. So you've got to, this comes back to what's relevant to your customer, how do you make them want to log in, and how do you do a fair value exchange for the data that they're going to share with you? I can give you some examples of that, some simple things we saw at Nike. When I was working there, you know, we found most of the transactions online were anonymous, people going into a store, you didn't know who they were. So we built the Nike app and the Nike membership to take care of that. Some of the value add things, which we weren't immediately obvious up front with the app, was you had, if you logged in and did the transaction through the app, all of your receipts were on there. So if you ever needed to do a return in future, you didn't have to save bits of paper, remember everything. You just took your app in, and with your membership number, they bring it up on the screen. Oh, yep, I see you bought them. That's a value add. That makes me want to always come in and make sure I'm logged in. That's just a very, very simple thing that was valuable to our customers. So what is valuable? So if you're going to build an app, everyone builds an app because I think they need an app. A lot of them are bloody awful and add no value and don't know why they've got them. Understand your customer, understand what's relevant, what adds value, and then help them with that, i.e. through your app. Then they're logged in because they're getting value out of it. Then you're understanding who they are and what they're doing. There's a fair value exchange, and then you're able to use that data. You don't need the third-party cookies because you know who your customers are, know what they're doing, and you can use that in an ethical way to do your targeting.
Exactly. I think that is one of the blind spots often, that if we are so, like for the engineer, if they are so immersed in the world of just the data and analytics without trying to think, what exactly is that mean for the customer? What exactly is that mean for the business? But if they were to try to think outside the box, there are so many ways that can be done to persuade and convince the customer to be willingly and happily to share their data, provided that you use them ethically and professionally. Those are the classic example. How do you persuade them? And also, what is it in for them? Why should they do it, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, first parties is so possible.
Yeah, it feels like a real kind of no-brainer, but it comes back to, do you really understand your customers and what they value? Because if you don't, you can't build a relevant app. You don't know what that fair value exchange is because you don't know what your customer values.
Exactly. My final, I lost my train of thought. That's fine. My final question for you is, what advice would you give to the data analytic team leaders looking to encourage partnership with the marketing team or any other team to build up this customer engagement? What I was going to say just came back to me. So I was going to say, I feel like we just missed a big blind spot in myself in here, which is with the third party and also some of the things that we just talked about, collecting the first party data. Companies should, other organizations should partner like the organization like yourself, Flyby, Loyalty, to get those data. You guys have incredible information.
I was going to mention that, but it sounds a bit too much like I'm advertising. That is the power of things like a loyalty coalition like ourselves, Flyby's New Zealand, Flyby's Australia. You're tapping into a second party data coalition.
Exactly.
As well as all this wonderful first party data. And it's fascinating what can be learned to make yourself more relevant, which then adds value to the member because they're getting more relevant offers that they're valuing. It's a really good way to do it. You can try and build those sort of partnerships ad hoc out in the market, like along a supply chain. It's often difficult because of the overlaps. You tend to have frenemies. You're allied with them on one thing, but you compete on another thing. So things like a coalition loyalty program is a very, very powerful way to tap into that first party and second party data concept. So definitely something to consider, particularly in the current climate.
Exactly. So I agree with that. So coming back to my final question, which is how do the senior analytic team leader looking to encourage the partnership to build up and get ready for the next few years?
Yeah, and I'd say learn how to listen. It sounds really dumb, but that means going and sitting in front of your counterparts in the other part of the organization and listen to understand. Listen to where their pain is, where their opportunities are, until you really understand what is keeping them awake at night, and you learn the language to be able to speak to them in a way they understand. Don't try and sell yourself, don't tell them anything. Sit and listen and learn genuinely, and it will take time. And as you build learning, you will then start to see opportunities where you can help them. Not that you're selling them what you can do, but you're going, oh my God, that takes you 4 hours to do the spreadsheet every morning. One of my folks could automate that and it'll take 30 seconds.
Yes.
No selling involved. Your counterpart's going to go, really? And when you deliver it, your trust goes up a bit more. Exactly. And at a certain point, they will then start asking you the question, so what is it that you guys do then? Yeah, that was really cool. Can you do other stuff? So but it all starts with spending the time to listen to understand and really understand what's going on in the rest of the organization.
I have a different suggestion to encourage people to listen. And this comes from a quote that I picked up many years ago. I don't know who exactly is the person who said it, but he said, God give us 2 ears and 1 mouth.
Yep.
Because he wants us to listen more and speak lesser.
100% right. And listen to understand, not listen just until there's a pause in the conversation so that you can say your bit.
Yeah.
Take it in, listen, digest it. And then from that, what will happen in my experience is you'll realize there's a lot that you need to go and read about. They'll be talking about things, go and read a marketing 101 book, go and read a supply chain 101 book. Find out what a balance sheet and P&L is so that you can talk to your CFO meaningfully. Build that broad knowledge base and listen, and you'll be the most valuable person in your organization.
Love it. Final 2 questions to close up this podcast interview. The question that I always have for every single one of my guests. The first one first is, what is your most important first principle?
Well, this one goes to, there's a Maori saying, so Maori is the original language of New Zealand, and it's he aha te mea nui o te ao, and it's he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. And what that means is, what's the most important thing in the world? And it's the people, the people, the people. And I think it's a really profound proverb, building back on what we've talked about, it ultimately all comes down to the people and humans. Invest in relationships, invest in trust, invest in other people, all the other stuff will follow and flow. So that's absolutely my first principle.
I probably will have to get you to write it for me. Final one is, what is one book that you have read and thought it would have been better for your younger self to have? Was that the earlier one that you mentioned?
The one I talked about, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I would recommend it to any technologists or data people, particularly the ones that find the whole human thing challenging. They much prefer their keyboard and ones and zeros. I think this is a bit of a programming guide to humans in many ways that will help realize that it's not a soft skill, it's science. You can learn it, you can understand it, and you need to.
Thank you so much, Brian. I pick up so many new things today, and for sharing a lot of the different aspects about the data analytics, the partnership with the marketing team, some advices for the data analytics professional to help them progressing their career. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on. It's been lots of fun, and I've been able to learn some things along the way as well too. So yeah, thanks a lot, Jason.
Thank you.
Hello. If you enjoyed this conversation, hit that subscribe button so we can meet again. If you don't, I'll be stuck in an infinite loop. So pull that part by clicking the subscribe and help me out. You can further support us by leaving us a kind review from wherever you are listening. At the end of the year, I will choose a reviewer to send a special gift to, and it might just be you. I look forward to seeing you here next week for a new adventure, if I can find my way out of this endless loop. See ya!